on a rifle range shrouded in dust and male disbelief. A young woman named Alara raised a bolt-action weapon that felt heavier than all the expectations stacked against her. 13 men had just fired. 13 men had missed. Now, a decorated general, stern as carved stone, watched with cold eyes, not to see if she would fail, but waiting for her to confirm his certainty that she must. The target was a tiny, wind-blown scrap of cloth so distant it was a pale speck against the desert browns. For her, it wasn't just a test of skill. It was the culmination of a journey from a war-scarred village where her first tools were a scavenged scope and a relentless will to protect what little she had left. Every silent critic, every scoff, every bureaucratic no had led to this single moment of suspended breath. The world believed this shot was impossible. She knew it was not. The question hung in the dry air. Could the precision born from a lifetime of invisible struggle silence a general's doubt and change the course of an entire army's future? The sun was a brutal, white coin in the sky, hammering the vast military training ground into a flat sheet of dust and baked earth. Heat shimmered above the concrete firing points, distorting the view of the distant target valley. At the central firing line, a tense, silent crowd of officers and select trainees stood, their uniforms dark with sweat. All eyes were fixed on the back of a retreating soldier. His shoulders slumped as he walked away from the rifle stand. His number made 13. 13 shooters, each handpicked as the best marksmen from their respective units. 13 failures. The air wasn't just hot. It was thick with a stew of disappointment and a prickling, unspoken anxiety. A major project, years and millions in funding, teetered on the edge of being scrapped. The Vanguard initiative was meant to develop the next generation of extreme-range precision rifles and, more importantly, the soldiers who could wield them. The final test was deceptively simple. One shot, under time conditions, at a target placed at a distance considered borderline theoretical. It was a small, ragged piece of white cloth tied to a swaying pole. So far away it danced in the heat haze like a ghost. No spotter, no advanced electronic aids, just raw skill, nerve, and an intimate understanding of the weapon, the wind, and the very curve of the earth. Now, the project's lead, General Eris Thorne, stood apart from the main group, a statue of grim authority. His face, weathered and stern, betrayed no emotion, but his jaw was clenched tight enough to grind stone. This was his vision, his gamble. The rifle on the stand, the Sentinel-7, was his dream made metal. Yet, it seemed the Army did not have a shooter who could match his machine. His aide, a young captain named Rylan, approached cautiously. "Sir, the backup list, we've exhausted the primary roster. The next in line is, well, it's candidate 14, the civilian consultant." Thorne didn't turn. "The girl from the survey team," he stated, his voice a low rumble. It wasn't a question. He'd seen her file. Alara Voss, a geographic and logistics specialist contracted for terrain assessment. Her personnel photo showed a woman in her late 20s with serious eyes and hair tied back in a simple, practical manner. The file noted an unusual personal request: permission to observe all live-fire tests. Her academic background was in cartography, but there was an odd, redacted section from a humanitarian NGO about field work in the conflict zones of the eastern reaches. Thorne had dismissed it. A paper pusher with field experience, nothing more. A desperate, absurd thought flickered in his mind. Is she even qualified on the platform? "Her security clearance covers basic familiarization, sir," Rylan replied, his tone hesitant. "But she's not military." "Protocol says protocol," Thorne interrupted, still staring at the distant, mocking speck of white. "Has given us 13 misses. Bring her up." Alara had been watching from the observation trench, a place reserved for support staff. She was not part of the uniform crowd. She wore simple, durable trousers and a tan shirt, her only gear a pair of high-quality, personal binoculars on a strap around her neck. She had watched each shooter with an intense, analytical focus, her lips moving slightly as if calculating under her breath. She saw not just the shots, but the shooters, the slight adjustments they made, the way they held their breath, the tiny, almost imperceptible tremors in their hands as they took the weight of the sentinel. She saw the wind flags they used, and she looked past them to the way the dust devils spun in the middle distance, to the gentle, inconsistent sway of the dry grass. When Captain Ryland appeared, looking embarrassed and urgent, she simply nodded, as if she had been expecting him. She followed him without a word, feeling the weight of dozens of confused and skeptical stares. Whispers trailed her like snakes. The civilian? The map girl? This is a joke. Thorne's lost it. She reached the firing point. The Sentinel, 7 lay on its bipod, a long, sleek, and complex beast of polished steel and composite material. It looked out of place next to her simple appearance. General Thorne finally turned to look at her. His eyes were the color of flint, sweeping over her in one dismissive glance that took in her lack of rank, her lack of a proper combat posture. "Voss," he said, her name sounding like an accusation. "You've observed the test parameters?" "Yes, General. You understand the conditions. 1 round. The clock starts when you take position. You have the standard 2-minute window to fire." "I understand. There is no room for academic curiosity here," he said, his voice dropping. "This is not a survey. This is a weapon. Can you handle it? Or are you going to waste our time and make this failure a complete circus?" Alara met his gaze. There was no defiance in her eyes, only a deep, unsettling calm. It was the calm of someone who had faced things far more terrifying than a general's disapproval. "The wind isn't what your flags say it is," she said quietly, her voice barely carrying over the dry breeze. Thorne blinked. "What?" "The flags at the 100 and 500-meter points show a steady cross breeze from the east. But between 800 and 1,200 meters, there's a thermal layer rising from the gully. It creates a vertical shear, pushing the air up and then pulling it west. Your shooters corrected for the horizontal wind. They didn't account for the bullet being lifted and then nudged sideways on its descent. They were aiming at a flat trajectory. The path is a curve." A stunned silence fell over the immediate group. This was advanced, almost intuitive ballistic science, spoken in simple terms by a woman in civilian clothes. Thorne's eyes narrowed. "And you propose to account for this curve?" "I propose to make the shot, General," Alara said. There was no boast in her voice. It was a simple statement of fact, like noting the color of the sky. A wave of murmurs broke out behind them. Thorne held up a hand, silencing them. His eyes remained locked on Alara. He saw something then, a flicker in her steadiness. It wasn't nervousness. It was memory, a shadow passing behind her eyes. He gave a single, sharp nod. "Take your position. The clock is yours." Alara moved to the rifle. Her approach was different. She didn't immediately lie down and get behind the scope. First, she knelt beside the weapon, running her hands over the stock and barrel, not with reverence, but with a mechanic's familiarity. She checked the chamber, felt the bolt's movement, adjusted the bipod legs minutely, pressing them into the soil for stability. She then lay down, but her posture was not the textbook perfect form of the soldiers before her. It was a personal, settled-in pose, as if she and the earth and the rifle were merging into one system. She pulled the stock into her shoulder, and it was then that Thorne noticed her hands. Slender, but with calluses in places he didn't expect, on the tips of her fingers along the edge of her palm. The hands of someone who had worked, not just in an office, but with tools with her hands for countless hours. She looked through the high magnification scope. The world narrowed to a circle of shimmering heat and dust, and at its center, the tiny, fluttering white flag. It was a world she knew. Not the specific range, but the feeling of distance, of isolation, of a target hanging in the void. The scope's crosshairs wavered, then grew still as her breathing slowed to an imperceptible rhythm. She was not just seeing the target. She was listening to the air, feeling the minute vibrations through the ground, tasting the dry grit on the wind. In that absolute stillness, a memory tore through her concentration, vivid and unbidden. Not of a sun-baked range, but of a gray, rainy dawn. The smell was not dust, but damp earth with smoke and fear. She was not 28, but 17, crouched behind a shattered wall in her village. In her hands was not a cutting-edge military rifle, but an old, bolt-action hunting weapon, its bluing worn off, its scope salvaged from a broken agricultural surveyor's tool. The target was not a cloth flag, but a man in rough armor, standing by a parked vehicle with a painted, menacing symbol on its side. He was lighting a cigarette, unaware of the shaky crosshairs hovering over his chest from over 500 meters away. Her younger self's heart was pounding so loud she was sure it would give her away. She had to make the shot. If she didn't, he would radio the others, and the patrol would come to finish what they had started, to loot the last of the food, to take more people. Her finger touched the cold, coarse trigger. She exhaled, and the world shrank to the man's surprised face as the crack of the rifle echoed through the ruined valley. On the range, Alara's finger rested lightly on the Sentinel's smooth, two-stage trigger. She was back in the present, but the past had clarified everything. This was just another shot, another necessity. She made a final, tiny adjustment to the windage dial, a correction that defied the textbook and the flags based on a feeling in her gut and the dance of the mirage in her scope. The crosshairs settled. Her body was utterly relaxed, yet coiled with potential energy. The crowd had ceased to exist. General Thorne had ceased to exist. There was only the rifle, the wind, the curve of the planet, and the tiny, defiant piece of white cloth. She took a final, soft breath, let half of it out, and between heartbeats, her finger took up the slack. The report of the Sentinel 7 was a sharp, authoritative crack that ripped through the silent afternoon. It was a sound of finality. Alara did not jump up. She stayed behind the scope, following the trace, her eyes seeing the invisible arc of the bullet as it raced downrange. A lifetime, 2.5 seconds passed. Then, at the target valley, the white flag jerked violently. It didn't just flutter. It spun, its tether severed cleanly by the high-velocity round. A small puff of dust rose from the pole behind it. A perfect hit. For a moment, there was absolute silence, broken only by the ringing in ears. Then, from the observation trench, a single, involuntary cheer erupted, quickly stifled. The officers looked at each other, then, at their scopes for confirmation, disbelief etched on their faces. General Thorne had not moved. He had watched her entire process through his own binoculars. He had seen the unnatural stillness, the confident, unorthodox adjustments. He had heard the shot, seen the result. The precision was undeniable, astronomical. It was the shot his project needed, the proof his weapon worked. But as he lowered his binoculars and looked at the woman now smoothly operating the bolt to clear the chamber, he felt a cold knot of realization in his stomach. This was no lucky shot by a clever civilian. The way she handled the weapon, the profound calm, the instinctual correction, this was a practiced, deeply ingrained skill. A skill forged in a crucible far removed from military ranges and sanctioned tests. She had done the impossible, and in doing so, she had shown him that he, General Aris Thorne, had fundamentally misunderstood the very nature of precision. It wasn't just in the machine. It was in the person. And the person he had just witnessed was a complete and unsettling mystery. The mission was saved, but 100 new, urgent questions had just been fired directly into the heart of his ordered world. The stunned silence on the range fractured into a chaos of low voices, radio chatter, and the hurried movement of officers. Technicians scrambled to confirm the hit data from the electronic monitors downrange. The number flashed on a small screen beside the firing point. A confirmed center mass impact. A record. An impossibility made fact. Alara rose from the firing position with the same economical motion she had used to settle into it. She placed the now-safe Sentinel 7 back on its bipod with a care that seemed almost respectful, then stood, brushing a light coating of dust from her knees. She did not look triumphant. There was no smile of victory, no glance seeking approval from the stunned men around her. Her expression was one of focused completion, as if she had finished a complex equation. The weight in her eyes, the shadow of that earlier memory, had receded behind a veil of professional detachment. General Thorne was the first to break the spell of the immediate circle. He strode toward her, his boots crunching on the gravel. The dismissive scorn was gone from his face, replaced by a sharp, analytical intensity. He stopped a few feet from her, his flint-colored eyes boring into hers, trying to strip away the layers of calm. "Where did you learn to shoot like that, Ms. Voss?" The question was direct, a command phrased as an inquiry. Alara met his gaze steadily. "I've done field work in difficult terrain, General. Long-range observation was sometimes a necessity." Her answer was smooth, rehearsed, a line from personnel file. Field work for a humanitarian NGO does not teach a person to make a 2,300-meter shot under variable wind conditions with an unfamiliar weapon system. Thorne countered, his voice low, so only she and Captain Ryland could hear. That was not observation. That was applied, high-stakes ballistics. That was combat shooting. The word combat hung in the air between them. Alara's mask didn't slip, but a slight tension appeared at the corner of her jaw. "I had a good teacher," she said simply, a clear dismissal of further inquiry. Thorne knew a stonewall when he heard one. He also knew that the shot had just resurrected his project. The Vanguard Initiative would get its next round of funding. The Sentinel-7 had a validation that no amount of lab tests could provide. But the key to that validation was standing before him, an enigma in plain clothes. He couldn't let her simply return her maps and surveys. "Your contract with the geographic team is secondary, effective immediately," he stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You are reassigned to the Vanguard project as a special consultant for marksmanship development and field technique. You will report to Captain Ryland, but you will answer directly to me." Alara's composure faltered for a second. "General, my expertise is in terrain analysis and logistics. That shot was a unique circumstance. I'm not a soldier. I'm not a trainer." "Your expertise," Thorne said, emphasizing the word, "just demonstrated a fundamental flaw in our training methodology. You saw something 13 of my best did not. You corrected for it instinctively. That is precisely the kind of expertise this project needs to understand and institutionalize. You will help us figure out what you did and how to teach it." He turned to Ryland. "Captain, get her set up with full project clearance, access to the specialist ranges, and all historical test data. I want a preliminary assessment from her on the common failure points of the previous 13 attempts on my desk in 48 hours." He looked back at Alara. "Welcome to the Vanguard, Ms. Voss. Your first task is to deconstruct your own miracle." He walked away, leaving Alara standing there, the center of whispered speculation and odd glances. The order was given. She was trapped. The next 2 days were a whirlwind of stifling bureaucracy and intense scrutiny. Alara was given a small, windowless office adjacent to the ballistics lab. Stacks of files appeared, performance reports of the 13 failed shooters, atmospheric data logs, weapons maintenance records. She was also given a security badge that granted her unprecedented access, a gesture that felt less like trust and more like being placed under a microscope. She worked methodically, cross-referencing the shooter's stated wind calls with the actual, layered wind data she had observed. She drafted charts, not with complex formulas, but with intuitive diagrams showing thermal layers and wind shear zones. She avoided the other project personnel, taking her meals alone and returning to her on-base quarters early. The military world was a foreign ecosystem, full of unspoken rules and hierarchies she had no interest in navigating. Her only point of contact was Captain Ryland, who was earnest, overwhelmed, and deeply curious. On the second afternoon, he brought her a cup of terrible coffee and lingered by her desk. "The general isn't one for theatrics," Ryland said cautiously. That shot, it changed everything. But he's right. We need to understand it. No one here believes in magic. Alara looked up from her notes. It's not magic, Captain. It's pattern recognition. Your shooters are trained on standardized ranges with controlled variables. They read wind from flags and meters. In the real world, the wind doesn't come from a flag. It comes from the land. From the difference between a rocky slope and a grassy field, from the heat of a road versus the cool of a stream. You have to see it, not just measure it. Rylan frowned, trying to grasp the concept. How do you train someone to see the wind? Alara was silent for a long moment, her mind drifting again, not to the village this time, but to the years after. You start by making them watch, she said quietly. Not targets. Everything else. The way dust moves, how trees sway differently at the top and bottom, the behavior of birds in flight. You make them understand that the air is a fluid full of currents and eddies. The bullet is just a particle moving through that fluid. She had learned this not in a course, but from a man named Kale, a quiet, broken former soldier who had found refuge in her village after his own war ended. He had seen her with that old hunting rifle, seen the desperate potential in her. He had taken her under his wing, not out of kindness, but out of a shared understanding of a need for a sharp, quiet edge in a soft, dangerous world. Their range had been the whole valley. Their targets were leaves on distant trees, specific stones on far cliffs, the rivets on abandoned machinery. He drilled into her the language of the environment until it became a second sight. Precision isn't about control, he would say, his voice rough. It's about conversation. You ask the wind a question with your aim, and you listen for the answer with your whole being. A knock on her office door jerked her back. It was General Thorne. He dismissed Rylan with a nod and entered, closing the door. He didn't sit. He examined her charts on the wall, her handwritten notes. Your assessment? He asked without preamble. It's as I said on the range, Alara replied, forcing herself to stay professional. The training creates a dependency on instrumentation. The shooters are technicians. They need to become naturalists. Thorne picked up one of her diagrams, a sketch of the range with swirling arrows depicting the thermal lift from a gully. This instinct of yours, this seeing, can't be replicated. It can be learned, she said carefully, but not in a classroom, and not under the pressure of a formal test. It requires time, immersion, and a different kind of mindset. Thorne placed the diagram down. Then, you will design a new training module, a pilot program. You will have 3 candidates. Not my top shooters, mid-tier performers. We'll see if your methods yield results where ours have plateaued. It was a test, of course. A test of her, not just her methods. Alara felt the walls of the institution closing in. She was being asked to systemize something deeply personal to turn a survival skill into a curriculum. She nodded, knowing refusal was not an option. Good, Thorne said. He moved to leave, then paused at the door. The file from the Eastern Reaches NGO. The redacted parts. Field work in volatile security conditions, involving protective site surveillance. A polite way of saying you were a sniper for a humanitarian convoy, wasn't it? Alara's blood ran cold. She said nothing, holding his gaze. You didn't just observe, Ms. Voss. You protected. You engaged. It wasn't a question. He had clearly done deeper digging. That shot on the range wasn't just skill. It was muscle memory from a life where missing had consequences far worse than a failed evaluation. He left, letting the truth sit heavily in the quiet room. Alara sank into her chair, the professional detachment crumbling. He knew, not everything but enough. Her past, the source of her precision, was no longer a private ghost. It was now a piece of data in General Thorne's project, another variable to be analyzed and exploited. The freedom she had found in anonymity was gone. She was inside the machine now, and its gears were beginning to turn around her, pulling her back toward the very thing she had tried to leave behind in those war-torn valleys. The pilot program was granted a neglected corner of the training grounds, a stretch of uneven terrain with a small, weathered observation shack, far from the pristine, regimented main ranges. Alara's 3 candidates were waiting on the first morning, looking more confused than eager. Corporal Finn, a solid shooter with poor wind-reading scores. Private Chun, young and keen but inconsistent. And Sergeant Hale, a career soldier with a stubborn attachment to the manual. They stood at attention in the cool dawn light, eyeing their new civilian instructor with unconcealed skepticism. Alara faced them, dressed in simple field clothes, no uniform to lend her authority. "At ease," she said, her voice carrying softly. "For the next month, you will not fire a single live round at a paper target." Sergeant Hale's eyebrows shot up. "Mung? The objective is to improve long-range accuracy. How does not shooting achieve that?" "The objective," Alara corrected gently, "is to understand a shot. The trigger pull is the last, simplest part of a long conversation. We're going to learn the language." She handed each of them a notebook, a pencil, and a small, powerful spotting scope. "Your weapons for now. Follow me." She led them on a walk, not toward the firing points, but out into the scrubland bordering the range. She pointed to a cluster of slender trees a few hundred meters away. "Look at the tops. Now look at the grass at the base. Tell me what you see." Corpora finskuintet. The treetops are swaying more. The grass is barely moving. Right. So the wind speed and direction of your firing position is different from the wind at the target. Your bullet has to travel through all the layers in between. She spent the morning teaching them to read the environment. The shimmer of heat on distant rocks indicating a thermal rise, the lazy, spiraling flight of hawks riding updrafts, the way dust, when kicked, didn't just blow away, but swirled in complex patterns. At first, the soldiers were impatient, treating it like a pointless nature hike. But Alara was patient, her explanations clear and rooted in practical effect. That thermal off the south ridge, it will act like a ramp, pushing your bullet high. If you don't compensate, you'll miss over the top. Your flags won't tell you that. Your eyes will. In the afternoons, they use the Sentinel rifles, but loaded only with inert training rounds. They would set up, go through their entire firing procedure, position, natural point of aim, breathing, wind call, and dry fire. Alara moved among them, making subtle adjustments. A slight shift in shoulder pressure for Hale, a different cheek weld for Chun, a reminder for Finn to feel the weight of the rifle settle into the earth, not fight against it. "The weapon is part of the landscape," she'd say. "You're not holding it up. You're letting it rest where it wants to be." She shared principles, but never her personal stories. Yet, her teaching was infused with the lessons from Kale. She taught them the clock method for wind calling, but also how to taste the wind for moisture, how to feel the change in pressure on their skin. It was holistic, almost meditative, and utterly foreign to the checklist-based training they were used to. Back in the project offices, General Thorne monitored the pilot's progress through Ryland's reports and his own discreet observations from a distance. He saw the unorthodox methods, the focus on feel over data. Part of him, the rigid tactician, was deeply skeptical. This seemed like mysticism, not soldiering. Yet, he couldn't ignore the change in the candidates' focus, their growing ability to articulate what they were seeing in the wind. His curiosity about Alara herself became a parallel mission. He accessed deeper archives, using his considerable clearance to pierce the redactions in her NGO file. Fragments emerged, references to defensive actions at a clinic in the city of Veridis, a note about neutralizing a threat to a food distribution point during the siege of the Call Pass. The language was dry and bureaucratic, but to Thorne, it painted a clear picture. Alara Voss hadn't just been an observer. She had been a protector, a hunter in a chaotic gray zone where there were no clear front lines. The precision he witnessed was born from necessity, honed in moments where calculation was the thin line between life and death. One evening, he summoned her to his office. Maps of the Eastern Reaches conflict were spread on his desk, not the current ones, but older, tactical grids from the height of the insurgency. "You were here," he stated, pointing to the Call Pass region. "During the worst of it, the NGO convoys were the only lifeline for the scattered villages. They were also prime targets for bandits and militia. Alara stood rigidly before his desk. My role was logistics and route security assessment, General. Route security often meant perched on a high point with a rifle, providing overwatch, did it not? Thorn leaned back, studying her. How many? The question was blunt, ugly, and hung in the sterile office air. Alara's face went pale, then carefully blank. How many what, sir? How many threats did you neutralize to keep those routes open? She was silent for a long time, her eyes fixed on a point on the wall behind him. The office was quiet, the hum of the air conditioner suddenly loud. The ghost of Kale was in the room with them. She remembered his final lesson, not about wind, but about cost. They had been on a ridge, watching a dusty road. Every time you do this, he had said, his voice empty, you take a piece of the world's chaos into yourself. You do it to create a small space of order, of safety. But the chaos stays. You count the shots, not the saves. I don't have a number, General, she finally said, her voice hollow. It was never about that. It was about creating a safe corridor. If a shot created a space for a truck to get through, or made a group of armed men decide to go elsewhere, that was the objective. The effect was the deterrent, not the statistic. Thorn absorbed this. He was a man who dealt in statistics. Rounds fired, hits confirmed, metrics of efficiency. Her answer spoke of a different calculus, one of psychological effect and measure violence. It was both more primitive and more sophisticated than simple killing. The man who taught you, Thorn pressed, sensing a vulnerability. He was military. Our military. His file is sealed, but the patterns are there. Who was he? A flash of raw pain crossed Alara's features before she sealed it away. He was a man who believed his war was over. He was wrong. He taught me to shoot so others could live. That's all that matters. She met Thorn's eyes, a quiet defiance returning. Are these questions relevant to the training program, General? Or are you just trying to understand your new tool? The challenge was direct. Thorn respected it. He had been digging into her soul, and she had called him on it. I need to know if the tool is reliable, he said, though the word tool now felt coarse. Your methods are unconventional. Your background is irregular. The success of this project and the potential lives it saves on future battlefields depends on understanding the foundation of your skill. The foundation is understanding that a shot is a system, Alara said, her composure returning, built on a platform of weary resilience. The rifle, the ammunition, the atmosphere, the shooter's mind and body, and the terrain. Your system ignores the last two or treats them as simple inputs. They are not. They're the most complex variables. My method is just about listening to the whole system. Thorn nodded slowly. The conversation had shifted from her past to her philosophy. It was a strategic retreat on her part, but it also gave him what he needed, insight into her operational mindset. He changed tack. The pilot program. Can it work? Can you give 3 average shooters a fraction of what you have? I can give them better eyes, Alara said. I can't give them my experiences. But better eyes might be enough to make the difference between a miss and a hit when it counts. Dismissed, Alara left his office feeling drained, as if she had just endured a prolonged, silent engagement. He was piecing her together, and every fragment he uncovered felt like a loss. Meanwhile, on the training ground, a small transformation was beginning. After 2 weeks of not shooting, Alara finally allowed live fire. The exercise was simple. Hit a series of small metallic plates at varying, unknown distances, with no range finders allowed. The candidates had to estimate the range using their new environmental awareness, the size of familiar objects, the clarity of detail. Corporal Finn, who always struggled with wind, spent minutes watching the grass, the heat waves, the way his own breath vapor drifted. He took a shot, a hit. Private Chun, usually rushed, took a deep, centering breath, let it out, and her rifle cracked. Another hit. Sergeant Hale, the manual reader, hesitated the longest, fighting his training. Finally, with a grunt of frustration, he stopped thinking and just looked. He saw the mirage boiling up from a depression between him and the target. He adjusted his aim low, trusting the heat to lift the round. The ping of success was the sweetest sound he'd heard in years. They weren't making impossible shots like Alaris, but their consistency, their first-round hit probability on unknown distance targets, was climbing dramatically. They were starting to see the system. Alara, watching them, felt a strange, fragile sense of pride. This was different. This was creation, not destruction. This was passing on Kale's lessons without passing on his ghosts. For the first time since being conscripted in a Thorns project, she saw a glimmer of purpose that didn't feel like a betrayal of her past. She was building a shield, not just sharpening a sword. But in the back of her mind, Thorn's probing questions echoed. He wanted to weaponize her understanding. The line between shield and sword, she knew, was perilously thin. The success of the pilot program was quiet but undeniable. Data collected by skeptical, but now intrigued, ballistics team showed a 40% improvement in first-round hit probability for Chun, Finn, and Hale on complex, unknown distance field shoots. More importantly, their after-action reports changed. Instead of simply stating wind from the east at 5 miles per hour, they described a consistent low-level flow interrupted by a strong thermal lift from the gravel pit at the 800-meter mark, causing a high impact. General Thorn reviewed the reports in his office, a rare, grim satisfaction on his face. Alara Voss's naturalist approach was not mysticism. It was advanced situational awareness made applicable to ballistics. It was a breakthrough. He authorized the expansion of her methods into a formal, selective course for the Vanguard Project's top-tier sniper candidates. Alara was to be the lead instructor, with her original 3 students as assistant trainers. The announcement sent minor shock waves through the project. A civilian, a woman, training the Army's elite? The grumbling was subdued, but present, a current of resentment Alara felt in the stiffened shoulders and overly formal addresses of some senior NCOs. Her world became a balancing act, designing lesson plans that could be scaled, fending off bureaucratic attempts to standardize her intuitive teachings into a dry manual, and managing the egos of talented soldiers who didn't like being told to watch grass grow by someone who had never worn their uniform. One such soldier was Master Sergeant Duran, a bearish, supremely confident man with a chest full of awards from direct action missions. He viewed the new training with open contempt. During a field exercise where candidates were to engage a target in a gusting, switching wind, Duran ignored his spotter's call, one of Alara's trainees, Private Chun, and used his own calculation based on a meter reading at the firing line. He missed twice. His third shot, fired in anger, also went wide. Alara, observing from behind, approached his position. "Sergeant, your spotter called a 2 mil hold right. You held 1. Duran didn't look up from his scope. The meter said 4 miles per hour left. Chin's seeing ghosts. This touchy-feely wind whispering is for people who can't do real math. The wind at the target is right to left, Alara said, her voice calm. But between here and there, it funnels through that canyon, which acts like a venturi. It speeds up and switches direction for about 100 meters in the middle of the bullet's flight." Chin saw the dust pattern change direction in the canyon mouth. "The meter here can't see that." Duran finally looked at her, his expression one of pure disdain. "With all due respect, ma'am, I've made kills in conditions that would make you freeze solid. I don't need a geography lesson from a contract worker." The surrounding candidates had gone very still. This was a direct challenge to her authority and her entire methodology. Alara felt a familiar, cold calm settle over her. It was the calm before a storming of a different kind. "Sergeant," she said, her tone losing all its softness, becoming flat and precise. "You have a spotter for a reason. Their job is to see what you cannot while you're focused on the target. You disregarded your spotter's observation because it conflicted with your preconception. On a real mission, that mistake doesn't mean a missed score. It means a missed opportunity, a revealed position, or a dead teammate. Your pride is a variable you didn't account for, and it just made you miss a stationary target 3 times. Duran's face flushed crimson. He stood up, towering over her. "You think you could talk to me about real missions? What do you know about real consequences? The memory of Kale's final mission flashed in Alara's mind. A failed shot. Not because of wind, but because of a moment's hesitation, a fragment of mercy that had cost a life. She knew about consequences in her bones. I know enough, she said, holding his angry gaze without flinching. I know that the most dangerous thing on any battlefield is a shooter who thinks he already knows everything. The environment is always teaching. You just stop being able to hear it. She turned to the group. Pack it up. We're done for the day. Master Sergeant Duran, you will write a detailed analysis of why your wind call was incorrect, using observations from the terrain, not the meter. You will present it to the class tomorrow. She walked away, leaving a fuming Duran and a group of candidates who now looked at her with a new, wary respect. She had stood her ground, not with rank, but with undeniable expertise and a steel they hadn't seen before. The incident reached Thorne. He called Duran in first, heard his complaint about unrealistic academic training. Then he called Alara, was publicly rebuking a decorated master sergeant, the most diplomatic choice. Thorne asked, though there was no anger in his voice. It was the necessary choice, Alara replied. He was teaching the others to ignore the core principle of the course. If I let it slide, to continue.